Today, I want to talk about something that is often hyper-focused on during this time of year. Do we rest or do we hustle? If you've ever looked at your child during the holidays and thought, wow, they really need a break, but also there's their upcoming exam, and I know that they were behind in spellings and math earlier. I don't know what to do. This episode, my friends, is for you. Because as parents, you walk the impossible tightrope between wanting them to have rest and worry-free time and playfulness during their breaks, but also knowing that we need to balance it with readiness and make sure that they're not slipping behind. And if you're still not sure if this episode is for you, but your Google search says something along the lines of how to help my child over the holidays, or your Instagram feed is all about parenting during the holidays and that tricky balance between rest and play, I invite you to take a moment to acknowledge those worries, but send them on their way. Here, we don't do guilt. We do science, strategy, and a little bit of parental sanity. If this sounds like a space that you want to be part of, take a second to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. Welcome to the Mindful Toolbox podcast. I'm Sarah Lynn, and this week we're bringing calm, curiosity, and neuroscience to the very important question. How can we rest and honor the break that our children so desperately need in December while not losing momentum and progress they've built over the last couple of months? Be sure to stick around until the very end, as I'm going to be distilling everything down into 3 powerful tools that you can try over this break. But for now, let's dig into the science. Okay, let me start with a confession. I feel like we know each other pretty well now, and this probably won't come as a surprise. I have never been very good at resting. So it's kind of ironic that I'm doing an entire podcast on the efficiency and the benefits of resting. I appreciate the irony here, but when I'm sick, I want to tidy the house. When I'm told to take a rest day, I will write myself a to-do list. Like if I'm injured, I will find a way that I can still be active or do something so I could tick it off a list. For years, I thought that resting meant doing nothing. But, luckily for me and luckily for everyone that hears this podcast, the science actually says otherwise. In fact, I was reading this really interesting article by Eleva Atanasova in 2025. So this is a very new research article. And they found that rest is recovery. They found that our brain restores attention through short, repeated cycles of focus and release. So what that means is we don't want long periods of any of them. We don't want long periods of intense focus, but we still don't want long periods of stillness. And I guess the main thing that I took away from that is that rest isn't the absence of activity. I don't have to just sit and twiddle my thumbs. In fact, it's the presence of rhythm. It's really like, have you ever noticed you become calmer after you've done something rhythmic, like baking or drawing or playing outside, rather than if you just sat and watched a program? The same goes with your child. And this is actually supported by the University of Westminster in 2024. There's a Dr. L. Smith, and they showed that what they termed green exercise, so gentle outdoor movement, it actually helps to regulate our children and their emotions and recover their focus faster than them passively resting. So what does that mean, passively resting? Like if they sat and watched a movie, they would be less focused and rested and regulated than if they were outside playing. So rest isn't the opposite of effort. It's that balance. It's that balance that makes effort possible. Like we need rest in order to accomplish things, right? So if this idea of rhythmic rest feels a little bit new, but also like the kind of science you wish schools talked about. Just like I wish I didn't have to wait until I was in my 30s to find out that rest was actually important. Make sure that you're subscribed, because every 2 weeks we unpack tools and evidence that parents can use right away to help their children learn without losing themselves. In episode 14, we talked about the body budget, which was the metaphor that we were using to describe how stressful situations withdraw energy from our budget, and when we have positive interactions, we add money and energy to our body budget. And this metaphor is not just good for looking at academics, looking at how we can approach difficult things, perhaps like entering into school. It works in unison with rest as well. The ironic part, or I guess the interesting part that really caught me while I was reading, is that if sleep routines vanish, or the sugar spikes, like our insulin spikes, go up, and there's no predictability. You know those days between the 26th and like the 29th, the 30th, no one really knows what's going on? Those days can actually be read as stress, not rest, because there's no predictability. Now, Lisa Feldman Barrett's her predictive regulation research, which shows that the brain doesn't react, it forecasts the feelings and emotions that we're going to need based on previous experiences. She says that if it can't predict what's next, our brain often assumes danger, which is wild, because those days of like the time melting and we don't know if it's night or day and what day is it actually, they sound like it would be a really good time for us, but too much novelty and too little rhythm, and that brain spends energy faster than it earns it. Think about it. We said that the body budget needs to have active deposits to replenish itself. But if all we're doing is giving way to the rhythms and we're not taking into consideration that we need to have a little bit of structure around what a day looks like similar morning wake-ups, consistent routines around bedtime as much as possible. If we don't have those things, our brain, whether we're conscious of it or not, is actually withdrawing energy and has very little to bump it back up. Now, I'm not being a Scrooge here. I'm not saying that everything needs to be timetabled out and we can't have a little bit of flexibility around what we eat, when we go to bed. Of course not. This is all about realistic parenting and engaging the neuroscience of health with how we can recreate that in a real, tangible life. So how can we acknowledge that rest is necessary, but too much rest can actually cause it harder for us to recover and regulate? How can we balance that in a time where the days kind of melt together? Well, start small rituals like a hot chocolate at the same time every evening, or a bedtime that shifts but only slightly and stays consistent, or morning light movement, or standing or going for a walk in the mornings together. These small micro shifts in routine, in structure, that becomes powerful stabilizers for the nervous system. Because even though our routine is different than what it was, we've still given a little bit of structure. In fact, C. Lawrence found that the UK families who kept predictable meal and sleep rhythms over the holidays actually had smoother January transitions and fewer anxiety spikes. So no, we don't have to keep the school timetable or wake up at 6 a.m., 7 a.m., even during the holidays. That's not what I'm saying. We need to acknowledge that our brains thrive when there's a little bit of predictability, especially if your child already has a propensity towards that anxious self. Giving them a little bit of a rhythm that's predictable, it can really help their nervous system, but also rebuild that body bank so much faster than letting all rhythm, all routine go by the wayside and just letting them be horizontal for the entire week. The reason why I talk about being horizontal when we're talking about rest is because stillness comes hand in hand when someone says the word rest. We need to remember that movement is medicine. Pareño and al. In 2025 found that short bouts of bilateral movement, we've talked about bilateral movement here, things like walking, dancing, drumming, things that engage both sides of the body, they restore not only working memory, which is what we've talked about, but attention as well. And it does so faster than quiet rest. So when that body is moving rhythmically, the brain reconnects both sides of the hemisphere. That's what Bruce Perry calls pattern regulation. So your child's study break this holiday might be kicking a football for 10 minutes outside or walking to the shop with music in their ears. What? How is that revision? How's that study? It's not avoidance. It's actually active restoration. You see, our brain is processing things behind our consciousness, like below our level of consciousness. So all of those bilateral movement breaks are actually helping their brain to connect both sides. James and Wood at the University of York found that creative recovery, so things like singing and painting and baking, these improve things like belonging and emotional safety for children who are recovering from stress. So if your child has had a really stressful first term and you know that they're needing a lot of rest, lean in to those creative activities. Encourage it. If they're spending hours painting or playing guitar, we need to know that that's not procrastination. If you've timetabled them some time to revise and they pick up their guitar instead, it's actually active repair. Now, I understand that there's a time and place for actually timetabled revision, but in the holidays, we want to allow their brain to recover. But if we want to dive in to what I read in every single study about rest and recovery during the holidays, there's one factor that stands above all the rest, and that is sleep. Sleep is the best revision strategy that you will never find on a school poster. And that begs to question, why not? You know, the Journal of Sleep Research, there was an article by Schlarb in 2025, I think it was May 2025, and they call sleep the single best modulator of learning readiness. But here's the catch. Holiday sleep chaos delays recovery. So when bedtimes shift too much, I'm talking hours too much, not minutes too much. When bedtimes shift by hours, the brain's default mode network, so the part that consolidates our memories, our hippocampus, their memory-saving elephant, it takes longer to reboot when we actually need it. It kind of gets murky. It's like walking through mud. We don't need to stick to a strict bedtime, but we just need to acknowledge that when we make a shift, it kind of needs to fall into a new rhythm. Because again, our brain, it loves predictability more than it loves perfection. It allows us to create that feedback loop that we know, that we feel comfortable with. So we can aim for steady sleep. It doesn't have to be identical, but steady sleep. And if you need a parenting mantra, make it consistency beats control. We don't want to put large parameters around when they can go to sleep, when they can wake up. I understand it's holidays and things will ebb and flow, but if we can make things rhythmic, whether it's the amount of sleep that they get, or it's that we're going to shift their bedtime for the next 2 weeks by 45 minutes. It's about finding that rhythm that works for you and your family, like that flow. Actually, speaking of flow, one of my favorite news studies this year comes from R. Meager on teaching for flow. It was a fascinating read because, it shows that when children are in flow, so they're creative, they're curious, they're immersed, they are so into something that the rest of the world kind of disappears. They're still practicing the same cognitive pathways used for formal learning, which is beautiful, which is wild, which actually reinforces the research of schools in other countries that don't enter children into formal education until they're over 6 or 8 years old. They spend their childhood actually building things, being outside, gaming, sketching. Like, they're not off task in that moment. They're actually just in a different mode of mastery, but it's still allowing their brain to fire in the same way that it would if they were sitting in the classroom. So this for me was like probably the most impactful resource that I read, because it shows that rest isn't stopping. It's learning, but in a different way. And that's what I want parents to hear this holiday season. Ultimately, I understand that there's a worry that we're going to lose progress if we take our foot off the gas. It's what we've been told. It's what society has created, not only for us as adults or business owners or people working within businesses, that push for the last 90 days or hit strong January, like hit January strong. I get all of that, and I understand why we're typing into Google, how can I help my child maintain their progress even on a holiday? I really, really hope that, like my own view of rest has been altered, I really hope that the science that I've shared with you today shows that we're not looking for the rest that's so extreme that it means that we actually are just horizontal and all of our days melt into one and we have no structure. And it doesn't mean that the only way we can have progress is if we sit at the table and revise our times tables in a formal manner. But instead, it's the beautiful, liberating, empowering research that says actually rest is about creativity and movement and being outside. And yes, having a little bit of structure, but allowing ourselves to indulge in those activities that we may not have previously because of our timetable. And more importantly, that when we do it, we shouldn't feel guilty, because it's actually connecting our brain in a way that bumps up that body bank, that prepares our hippocampus, our memory sorter, for active formal learning. Like, that to me is something that I don't just think is powerful news for our children, but I'm not going to lie, I'm so excited as an adult to know this information, to know that I could indulge in Christmas crafts and December baking and going for long walks and not feel guilty that I'm not progressing something or learning something or taking something off the to-do list, because my brain is actually really, truly benefiting from it. Okay, welcome to the end. Congratulations on sticking with me. Here are the 3 tools that I promised that you should try this break. Tool number 1, the 3-to-1 balance rule. So if all of this sounds great, but how does it work theoretically? Well, we have 3 parts of rest to 1 part of learning. So for every 3 hours of free rest, we want 1 hour of gentle revision or curiosity-led learning. What do they want to learn about? How to sew, code? Great. Tool number 2, let's get predictable with play. Doesn't have to be timetabled in, but let's keep a few routines the same. That predictability creates safety and therefore allows our prefrontal cortex to actively engage with the world around us. It's better for everything. And tool number 3, last but not least, our body budget reset. That's the main goal of the holidays. 1 movement, 1 connection, 1 stillness. And that's enough. I feel like that's going to be my mantra for myself over the holidays. I did something active. That's great. I did something where I'm connecting with myself or someone else. Perfect. And I also have something permission, like granted permission for just stillness. I love it. So as you head into the break, please remember that your child doesn't need a perfect timetable. They don't need to hunker down and read a million books and practice their times table every single day for hours at a time. What they need is predictability, a little bit of rhythm, and rest that restores, intentional rest. We need to do more good so it offsets the things that are withdrawing from that bank account. That is what rest is. If this episode gave you a new way to think about rest, just like researching for it did for me, please share it with another parent who's still trying to get the December break right. Until next time, keep breathing, rest intentionally, and remember, calm isn't a pause from learning, it's where learning can actually begin. I'm Sarah Lynn, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Cheers.